Hi guys, so this is a really unusual week because usually I do 0 videos and this week I'm doing 2 videos, neither of which I wanted to do. It's just that I keep finding myself in the situation where it just feels necessary. This particular video, I'm sure you've seen, there's this New York attorney named Aaron Schlossberg. He has this horrible, like disgusting to watch racist rant, and so I'm now seeing all these articles that are calling for his disbarment, and so I think it's a really interesting question, well, a few interesting questions here. You know, could he be disbarred? Should he be disbarred? And, you know, what other commentary is there about this kind of speech? The reason I feel a little bit uniquely called upon to make this video, well, several reasons. Anyone who watches my videos knows I'm incredibly in favor of free speech. I commented about this previously, specifically in the scope of lawyers, in a video that I did about James Damore being fired from Google, which seems like maybe it might not be related, but if you watch the video, you'll see that there's a connection there. And I'm really, really concerned about this issue in light of recent changes in Ontario, which require attorneys to make diversity statements. I actually have personally had Aaron as opposing counsel, and it was an incredibly unpleasant experience. And I can't really go too much into it other than to say it was a corporate matter just because of client confidentiality. But I can tell you that it was, you know, I'm not one to kick someone when they're down. So I'll suffice it to say it was really unpleasant to the point where it was memorable. So I don't really have any good feelings towards this guy. I really think that what he did, it's, you know, my parents are immigrants, so it touches me in a really close place, and I think it's really despicable. The question becomes even more interesting because I really do personally dislike the guy, and he made my life slightly a living hell for a short moment in time. But, so, you know, it's an interesting question, which is, you know, how far do we go to protect the speech that we find reprehensible? And then there's more here also, because obviously attorneys are held to a little bit of a higher standard. It's more than just about free speech for attorneys, because there's also the question of fitness to practice law. So, like, is there a question of mental instability here? I also just want to preface this by saying I'm not currently practicing in New York. I do have a real estate practice in New Jersey, and I am also writing children's books, so this is from a little bit of a previous time. In this case, what we're looking at is the New York rules of professional conduct, which are incorporated into the court rules, and I think that there are several rules that are potentially implicated here. I don't know if that means that he violated these rules, but at the very least, they are worthy of discussion. So the first rule, it comes right at the beginning, Rule 1.1, which is the rule of competence. I don't know, you know, I don't know how this would be applied, but I think there could be an argument that if this guy is pretty racist, and it seems pretty racist from this video, is he competent to represent let's say Spanish-speaking clients? Normally, a rule such as this is used to determine, okay, are you a competent attorney? Could you argue that being racist would affect your competence to represent certain people? Interesting question. I don't know. And just for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to like get deep into the case law. So if anyone else is an attorney and watching this and knows of anything where someone can get, you know, can violate 1.1, the rule of competence, by their character, I think that would be a really interesting question, but it's some place to start. Okay, so next rule, we have 1.7, which is conflict of interest. This is another rule that isn't really used regularly in this manner. So normally rule 1.7 is for, like, let's say you're representing a client and you've in the past represented someone adverse to that client, something like that, or representing 2 people at once who might have adverse interests. That might not be allowed, or it might be waivable, but, you know, when you're an attorney, your first duty is to your client above all your other interests. So I think it would be really interesting, and again, maybe I shouldn't be making this video because I haven't done enough of the research, but I think it would be interesting if any other lawyers are watching this to comment, you know, do do you know of case law where this has been applied in a character manner? Well, here's what the rule says. Except as provided in paragraph such and such, a lawyer shall not represent a client if a reasonable lawyer would conclude that there is, and then I'm going to skip to part 2, a significant risk that the lawyer's professional judgment on behalf of a client will be adversely affected by the lawyer's own financial, business, property, or other personal interests. So is the fact that this guy seems to be pretty adamant about, I don't know, being pretty racist, I mean, does that count as a personal interest that would adversely affect, let's say, a Spanish client? I don't know. That's like really interesting. I don't know if that's ever something that's been litigated. So I wanted to make this video as promptly as possible. Maybe it's something I would look into. I haven't gotten a chance to look into it. But if any lawyers know if that's ever been used in that manner, I wouldn't foreclose it because, laws are just sometimes applied in broad ways. The really interesting one here is Rule 8.4, which is misconduct. And that's because there's a little bit of a catch-all in here. Misconduct. The lawyer or law firm shall not, okay, let's skip A, doesn't matter. B, engage in illegal conduct that adversely reflects on the lawyer's honesty, trustworthiness, or fitness as a lawyer. Now, I don't know, let's say if this had risen to the level of harassment, maybe somehow you could say that's illegal conduct and it adversely reflects on his honesty, trustworthiness, or fitness as a lawyer, specifically fitness as a lawyer because he's coming off as a little crazy. But I don't know that this rises to the level of harassment. But if you skip down to, there's a few more. So D, engage in conduct that is prejudicial to the administration of justice. I think there is an argument that for a lawyer to behave in a racist way is conduct that's prejudicial to the administration of justice. It's a little bit of a stretch, but I do think the possibility is there. And the reason I think it's there is because a lawyer really is an officer of the court technically. For someone who's technically an officer of the court to behave in a racist manner in such a public way, I think there's an argument, I don't know if I'd agree with it, but I think there's an argument that it can undermine confidence in the judicial system, even by just creating the appearance of some kind of inherent biases by people who are considered officers of the court. Like I said, I think it's a little bit of a stretch. I don't know. I think there's other rules to look at here, but I want to include every possibility because you know what? Even though it's a bit of a stretch, sometimes rules are stretched and applied very broadly, and it could happen. So then there's letter G, which seems to get a little more interesting. It says unlawfully discriminate in the practice of law, including hiring, promoting, or otherwise determining conditions of employment on the basis of age, race, creed, color, national origin, sex, disability, marital status, or sexual orientation. So I mean, it's getting closer, but the thing is, it says unlawfully discriminate, and it lists all the ways how, but it says in the practice of law. So I would say, this one really doesn't apply because, I mean, I don't think getting a salad or whatever else he was getting is the practice of law. But now we have the catch-all, which is H. And H is the one that I discussed in the previous video with regards to what's going on in Canada and with regards to James Damore, which again, like I said, seems unrelated, but there was a relation there. But H, engage in any conduct that adversely reflects on the lawyer's fitness as a lawyer. And I think that if any of them are going to apply, it's going to be this one. And I'm very torn on this rule because I kind of understand it, but it's also a very dangerous rule when it comes to the First Amendment. Because here, okay, do I think that the legal profession as a whole would be better off without this guy? I don't know him that well, but my intuition says maybe, probably. But I don't know, individual rights are so important to me, and I worry how far this can go. And I kind of feel like the correct sacrifice would be just to realize that there's going to be racist people and they're going to say horrible racist things, and we can still continue on as a society because we're kind of balancing evils against other evils, and the other evil being, if we don't hold this bright line, these First Amendment bright lines, which protect speech, the alternative is how far can this go? And unfortunately, it's a slippery slope argument. But as you can see, what's happening in Ontario, it's not unrealistic that these rules begin to go too far. And my argument is, with regards to the Ontario rules, they have gone too far to the point where now I think the most the speech that it requires the highest form of protection, let's say in Ontario for lawyers, which is political speech, I think has become not protected in a way that is very, very disturbing when it comes to attorneys. We have to remember how uniquely situated attorneys are in society. If attorneys are not protected in terms of their First Amendment, we are the complainers of society. We are the people who are there when no one wants to be there to set things right. And we are the ones who have to defend terrorists. And we are the ones who have to do those unpopular things. In New Jersey, you know, there's a pro bono requirement, and I had to deal with a domestic violence dispute. And I don't, you know, I don't support domestic violence, but that person had a right to a defense. So, I mean, it's just, I think, something that we have to take on the chin and accept in society, because I don't know what the alternative is, and it seems like the alternative could be very, very bad. I want to point out a couple more things. Now, if this guy's just a lawyer, if he were a judge, I would come to a completely different conclusion. I think, like, someone who's a judge or in any position to make a decision, someone who's even an administrator in a court, or even a court clerk, because court clerks could affect judges, I think if he were in that kind of position where he's really having like a deciding type sway over people's life, I think that would be absolutely a different story. And judges actually do have different rules. They have like judicial canons. So I want to clarify that. I think if this were a judge, or, you know, even someone who was a representative of any kind, someone who had any power, even the lowest clerk in a court, I think this would be really, really insane. And I think they would have to be terminated, because I think they would not be fit for that position. But right now we're talking about a lawyer, not, let's say, a judge or someone in one of those positions. Another thing that I want to clarify is the reason I say this. I think his conduct was actually pretty close to harassment. And I think that there's a difference between speech and harassment. And so I think if his conduct went like a little bit higher, like a touch higher, I would come to a different conclusion. Because I think that there's a difference between having speech and like kind of being threatening and, you know, putting someone in a position where they feel like they might be assaulted or they might be in physical danger. Because it doesn't rise to that level, that's why I kind of fall to the side of he probably won't be disbarred. I don't know if he would be disciplined. I think this is kind of right on the edge, and frankly, I think that's where it should be. As much as we don't like it, it's really hard to deal with these issues, but I think it shows a level of maturity when we accept outcomes that we would rather not have, because the reality of our legal system is such that you need to balance interests, and it's naive to think otherwise. And we can take our society and compare it to some ideal utopia that doesn't exist, but what we really need to compare it to is the society of today and yesterday, and see how we can make it better. In my view, I think this type of stuff really just makes my stomach turn, but the thought of policing the speech of attorneys, I think, is so, so dangerous. Not just for attorneys, but for everyone, for all of society, that it's not a road that we want to go down. I want to finish this video with a Shakespeare quote, and it's a famous one as applies to lawyers. It's the quote that says, "And first, let's kill all the lawyers." And it's actually been interpreted in a really, in a wrong way. What that quote is about is tyranny. And if you want to have tyranny over society, the first thing you do is you kill all the lawyers. Now, of course, we're talking metaphorically here. By kill all the lawyers, what you really mean is silence all the lawyers. But it's something to think about, because it was wisdom back in Shakespeare's day, and it's wisdom now. The thing that stands between tyranny and lack of tyranny are people who are loudmouths, and lawyers are the biggest loudmouths of all. It's our job to sometimes be disgusting in the things that we say, but that's because everyone has the right to a defense. Even the most reprehensible person, even a terrorist, they all have a right to defense, and we have to be really, really, really careful before we silence the lawyers. So I ask you to think about that before jumping to conclusions about what's bad for society and what's good. We have to be really, really careful not to compare ourselves to an ideal society, because no society is ideal. There is no utopia. We live in the real world, and silencing lawyers will have consequences. Finally, I want to do a shameless plug. If you're watching this, this might be the first time you're seeing my videos. It might not be. I'm pretty loudmouth libertarian, and I'm working on a series of baby books called Little Libertarians. And if you are of that mindset, please check it out and support it. I'm going to be crowdfunding those books in the coming weeks, and all the updates will be on the Facebook page, which I'll include below. I'd really, really appreciate your support on that, because I think it's so, so important from a young age to begin teaching the principles of liberty to children so that they can enter into the higher levels with a nice, solid framework for the foundations of liberty and why it's so, so important to be exercising the amazing rights that we have in this country, which unfortunately and yet fortunately even include the right to be a reprehensible racist.